Hello, and welcome to Xamarin University. My name is Dietrichson, and today we're going to talk about how we can use PaintCode with Xamarin.iOS. So I'm assuming that not everyone knows what PaintCode is, so I want to start off by first discussing what exactly it is and how we can use it. So PaintCode is a vector-based drawing tool. However, the big difference between PaintCode and other vector-based drawing tools is that PaintCode can actually emit code in real time. So because we're using Xamarin, it does allow us to emit C# code, but it also does support languages like Objective-C and Swift. You're probably wondering, what is the benefit? Why do I care if C# code is emitted? The answer to that is power. Because we have C# code, now when we go back to our Xamarin iOS applications, we can interact with this code to change our drawings in real time. For example, this allows us to have one cool feature of adding variables to our drawings. If we wanted to, we could add a variable to the color of this square. This would allow us to change the value of that variable in code, and ultimately it would change the color of the square. Now, PaintCode's IDE is split into 7 different components. The first component is the toolbar. The toolbar is located at the top of the IDE, and it contains the most common drawing tools. The next component are the tabs. The tabs are located just below the toolbar, and they can be used to organize your drawings. Each tab can contain multiple drawing canvases. Next is the library, and this is a very cool feature. This is basically where you define your resources for all of your drawings. Things like colors and gradients and images and variables are all declared here. Once they're declared in the library, it is really just a simple click and drag to apply these resources across all of your drawings. Next up are the canvases. These are located directly in the center of the IDE, and these are your drawing canvases for a selected tab. We also have a code view. The code view is the actual code that is being emitted from your drawings. This is located at the bottom of the screen, and you can also select different languages directly in this code view. Next is the browser. The browser is very similar to the document outline in Xamarin.iOS. This allows you to see all of the shapes that are on the screen. You can also make selections in the browser to select the correct shape and make the modifications. And finally, we have the inspector. The inspector is very similar to the properties pane in Xamarin.iOS's storyboards. This allows you to select a shape and then modify all of the properties of that shape, like the color and size. So what I want to do now is I want to jump into PaintCode, and I want to show you where all these components are located. I also want to build a custom control. We're going to build today a custom checkbox. Hopefully, by seeing how we can build this custom checkbox, it will show you how powerful this software is and what other things you can build as well. Okay, so here we are. So the first component that we talked about was the toolbar, and the toolbar is located right here. So we have rectangle, oval, we have different ways of combining shapes together. These are all the common things that you'll use. Next is the tabs. You can see right here we have our current tab, but we can also create new tabs, and there's a special tab called Style Kit that we will look at in just a moment. On the left-hand side, we have the library, and you can see where all these resources are defined. We have colors, gradients, shadows, images, and variables. The canvases are located in the center of a tab. So this is our first canvas, but we could add more canvases as well. Next is the code view. The code view is located down here at the bottom. And right now you can see it's set to C# Xamarin. Yours by default probably isn't. So select here and go down to C# Xamarin. The browser is located right here where it says tab. Once we start adding shapes, the browser will fill up. And finally, the inspector is just below that where it allows us to modify the tab name. This is going to be the inspector, and it will show us all the properties for a selected shape. Okay, so let's start messing with building our custom control. And once again, I want to build a custom checkbox. And I decided on a custom checkbox just because it's easy and it will introduce you to how you can use PaintCode properly. So let's first select our canvas and let's just make it a little bit smaller. So our checkbox is going to be simple. It's really just going to consist of a rectangle. So select rectangle and draw a rectangle like that. We'll size it in just a second. And then it will also consist of a text box. So let's select our rectangle, and in the inspector on the right hand side, let's change the width and the height to be about 15 by 15. Now the text that says hello world, notice how it's blurry. The reason why it's blurry is because it allows us to display our content here in different resolution densities. So right now it's set to 1x displays, but if you set it to infinite density, you can see it is now clear. So before we go on and fix this up, let's talk about colors first, because there's a couple cool features with it. I want to first show you how these resources work. So if you head over to your colors, you can select the plus icon. And now I can create a color. So let's make ours, let's say a blue. So I select a blue color, and I can give my color a name. So I'll call this my text color. I'll hit enter. Once I have my text color created, I can select this little circle, drag it onto my text, and release. And you can see I can select this color for the fill, the stroke, or the text color. I want to make it the text color, so I'll bind it to that. So now that this resource is created, I can continue to drag this arrow onto other controls and set those colors as well. And the cool thing is because this is a resource, if I ever change this color, all of the components that are hooked up to this color will change as well. So for example, if I select my text color, I right click and go to edit, I can move this around, and notice how I move it, hello world is changing. Now, another cool feature is base colors. So for example, if I go to my colors and I select plus again, I can create a second color. I want this color to be my box color, this little gray box right there. Now, I want this box color to be based off of my text color. So I'll go to base color and I'll select it as text color. And what I want to happen is I want my box color to be a little bit brighter than my text color. So I'll go to the operation and I'll say, let's change the brightness and let's make it a little bit brighter like that. We could also do darker. This is just an example. Once I do that, I have this color. I can now go and I can drag it onto my box and I can make it fill that color. Now the cool thing is, because my box color is based off of my text color, if my text color changes, for example, let's say it's red, notice how my box also changes. It's changing and it's also always brighter. Whatever the new text color is, the the box will just be a brighter version. Okay, so far we have our box, our text, and some colors. If you go down to your code view and take a look, you can see all of these controls and the text and the graphics, they're all being created by just creating C# code. So you can take a look and you can look through the code and see how it's doing it. Now, one problem that we're going to have right now is the fact that our text and our box are based off of constant values. What I mean is, if you scroll down, for example, here's our text rectangle for our text that says hello world. Notice how it's being defined by a CGRect, but it has constant values, which means in my iOS application, when I build it in the storyboard, if I try to make it bigger or smaller, it's really not going to change because it's based off of these constant values. One cool thing with PaintCode is I can create dynamic shapes by creating frames. So for example, I can go up to my menu at the top and select frame. And I'm going to create a frame around my two controls or my two views. So as you can see, when I create the frame, immediately if I move this frame around, it now moves everything because the text and the box are now based off of the frame. If you look at our C# code again, you can see draw canvas 1 takes in a frame, a CGRect, and now our text rectangle is based off of the frame as well. What I want to do is, I want to say, when our frame changes, I want to change the contents inside. I want it to be dynamic. Because right now, if I make my frame bigger, like I would be doing inside my storyboard, nothing happens. We can solve this by using constraints. By selecting on my text, you can see right here are our constraints. You can see we have constraints for the 4 edges, and we also have constraints for the width and the height. Now, if it's a solid line, that means it's a constant or a fixed value. If it's squiggly, that means it's stretchable and it can grow or shrink. What we want to do is we want to say this hello world text should always be a constant value from the edge of the screen or the edge of the frame. But in the other directions, it should probably grow, right? I want it to probably stay centered as it gets bigger. And if there's more text, I want it to get bigger and wider. So if I select on my text, I can define this. So you can see right now, I do have that constant from the left edge, which is good. But I want it to be stretchy on the bottom and the top so that it will always be centered. So I can go ahead and select that there as well. Finally, I also want the hello world to get bigger or smaller if the text gets bigger or smaller. So I'll make the width and the height stretchy as well. And by creating these constraints, if I go move the frame, you can see the hello world is staying centered, and if the text gets bigger, this text box would as well. Next, I want to do essentially the same thing with the rectangle or the square as well. So I'm going to center this right now, and then I'll also have the same setup. So hopefully now we're getting somewhere. Okay. So with this setup, with the rectangle, I actually don't want it to get bigger because I want the actual check to stay the same size. So let's actually make those constant in there. Next, I need to create the actual check mark. And to keep it simple, I'm just going to use an oval. So I'll create an oval right here. I'll make it, let's say, 10 by 10. And let's kind of just try to center it in our square. Once again, you can give this some color if you want. I'm going to leave it gray for now. Now, what I want to happen is, if the checkbox is checked, I want this to be visible. So we need to add a variable. So let's go down to our variables, hit the little plus sign, and let's select bool, because is visible is a bool value. So I'll select bool, and I'll call this is checked. And I'll hit enter. Now, one thing I want to talk about is where these variables get declared. If you go into any variables menu, you can select this little gear icon, and it will tell you how it's being treated. Is it a local variable or is it a parameter? We want it to be a parameter so that we can change it in code by just calling the method with a different parameter value. So let's take this isChecked bool value and let's drag it to our little oval, and we'll attach it to the visibility property. So now if you look at your C# code, you can see when we draw this canvas by calling the draw canvas method, it takes in as a parameter the frame, which is the size of the control, and this bool to indicate should I show it with the check mark or not. Now finally, I'm also going to add a variable for the text. So I'll go to text. I'll call this my checkbox text, and I'll attach that to the text. So now these variables are parameters to my method, so I can change them in C# code. And you can actually see them working here as well. For example, if I go to my isChecked variable and I unselect it, you can see the visibility is now gone. Okay, so with our control created, let's now click Style Kit. So Style Kit is basically a container. It takes all of your drawings, all of your colors, and it puts them all together in this nice package. So we're going to export this. This essentially is one class with all of our code. So you can give it a name, a project, an author name, and a company name. I'm just going to leave everything by default and click export. Once again, click export, and I'll just save it off to my desktop. Okay, so here I am now in a brand new Xamarin.iOS application. I'm going to right click on my project, go to add files, navigate to my desktop, and I'm going to grab that style kit and just copy it in. You can open up style kit, and because I didn't set any of those properties, I should probably change the namespace to be my namespace, which is PaintCode exercise. And I'll leave the class just called StyleKitName. Now let's go to our storyboard and let's just create a UI view and drag it on. And we'll just give it a size. Now remember, because we're using frames inside of our drawing, it doesn't really matter what the size is. It will be able to adjust and adapt. But I'll just make it something like that. I'll also just give it auto constraints. Now I'm going to give my view a class name. I'll call this my custom checkbox. Hit enter. And when I do that, it will create this custom checkbox class that derives from UI view. Now what I want to do, I want to say when this view gets drawn, let's draw our custom checkbox. So let's override the draw method, and inside draw we're going to use the style kit name, and we'll call the draw canvas method. And as you can see, it takes in parameters. So we'll first pass in the rectangle, the frame for our view from the storyboard. So I'll pass in rect. For the is checked, we need to pass in should it be checked or should it not be checked, which I don't know yet. Let's create a public property called public bool is checked, and we'll pass that into here. And same thing for the string text. We'll create another string called text, and I'll pass that in as well. Now what I want to do is I want to say when I select this checkbox, I should flip the flag on the is checked property. So I'm going to override the touches ended event. This will get called when I stop touching the view, which is our checkbox. And I'll say when we are done, let's say is checked is equal to the opposite of itself. So whatever it was, let's just flip it. After we flip it, we also have to say, let's redraw our canvas, or let's redraw our control. To do that, we have to call a method called setDisplay or setNeedsDisplay. That will tell it to redraw and recall this draw method. Now it will have the new isChecked value, and it will redraw our control with the new value being passed in. Now, one thing we have to do is, by default, the background color of this view is black. I want to set it to white or clear. So I'm going to override a method called awakeFromZib, which gets called when it's created. And I'm going to just say background color equals UIColor.clear. Now, finally, I want to just set the default values for text in isChecked inside our view controller to give that power to our users. So I'm going to go back to my storyboard, and I'm going to give my view a name called My Checkbox. And when I give it a name, I'm going to head over to my view controller, and in the view did load, I'll just say mycheckbox.text is equal to click me, and mycheckbox.isChecked, I'll just set to false right now. And let's run our program. Okay, so the program is running, and you can see our checkbox has been rendered. If I select click me, you can see it's showing the little check circle. So everything seems to be working so far. The last thing I want to do, I want to make this more practical by providing a selection event. So let's go to our custom checkbox, and let's create an event. We'll say public event, and we'll just use the built-in action delegate, passing in a bool value. The bool value in the action delegate is there to indicate if it is selected or if it is not selected. So after our touches ended has finished, we'll go off and we'll just say if checkbox selected is not equal to null to see if we have any subscribers. We'll go off and we'll fire off the event by calling checkbox selected, passing in our isChecked property. So when I select the checkbox, it will fire this event, and back in our view controller, I can subscribe to that. So I'll say my checkbox selected plus equal, and I'll just use a lambda expression. And I'll say if our object, which is the bool value, is true, then let's set our background color of our view to, let's say, I don't know, a green. Else, we'll just set it back to white. So by providing this is now sort of like a real checkbox. Let's run it again. So here's the program running. If I select my checkbox, the event's going to get fired. We listen to it, and now we're changing our background color. So we just made a real custom checkbox. So that brings us to the end of this lightning lecture. If you have any questions about what we discussed today, you can always shoot me an email or check out the official PaintCode website for great documentation and tutorial videos. Once again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in future classes.